things I never had.
Buy everything.
I wanna be on the cover of Forbes magazine, smiling next to Oprah and the Queen.
What up, Oprah?
Oh, every time I close my eyes,
What you see,
I
bro?
see my name in shining lights. Oh, yeah,
And what
yeah.
else?
A different city every night. I swear the world better prepare for when I'm a billionaire.
Yeah. Sing it.
When I'm a billionaire. I wanna be a billionaire so freaking bad.
Hello, everyone, and good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight. We're going to get started. Stefan, if you could hit the record button for me when you're ready. Thank you all so much for being here at our first webinar as part of the beta testing round 3 of the FAFSA. We're thrilled that so many of you are with us. We are over 1,000 people attending tonight. We're thrilled to have all of you with us. I hope that if you're over the 1,000, you've found your way to our live stream on YouTube. Don't worry if you're missing any of this. We will, and we are recording tonight's session. We will be sending an email out tomorrow, which will have a link to the recording, as well as a link to the important websites and links we're going to cover this evening. As a promise, you will get a copy of this recording. We're also guaranteeing that we're going to get to your questions, as many of them as we can tonight, to try to answer them for you. What I will say is, if you could give us a little grace and a little patience, please, and stay with us, we're going to answer probably many of your questions as we go through the presentation tonight. So I know a lot of you are eager and excited about early access to the FAFSA. I don't blame you at all. And you have a lot of good questions. I bet most of them we're going to answer as we go through the presentation this evening. So please stay with us, stay tuned. We'll do this webinar will run no more than an hour. Probably the presentation part of it will be about 30 to 40 minutes, and then we'll have lots of time to answer your questions as we go through. So again, stay with us. We'll answer many of your questions as we go. Who am I? My name is Daniel Barkowitz, and I am the Assistant Vice President for Student Financial Assistance and Student Employment at the University of Miami. It's my pleasure to be in partnership with Bridge to Life and the Broward Education Foundation. We are offering this FAFSA beta to you in partnership with Florida Atlantic University and Broward College. Really happy to give you the chance to reach out and complete your FAFSA well in advance of the rest of the country. I'm going to walk you through all of that tonight and give you all the details about what the beta means, what you've been invited to, and what are your steps going through. But before I start, I want to acknowledge my colleagues who are behind the scenes staffing tonight to try to answer your questions. And just logistically, just a piece of information. The chat is open, but please note that we are not necessarily monitoring the chat. So if you have a question, your best option is to put your question in the Q&A. So that is where we're going to see your questions. That's where we'll answer your questions. The chat, because lots of you have access to it, hard for us to track. It moves pretty quickly. So again, if you have a question, please make sure to drop that in the Q&A as we go. So again, we are recording. We will send you the recording tomorrow. Let's step in and let's talk through what is this beta FAFSA. And to begin with, let's talk about what is the FAFSA. So the FAFSA, as you probably know, stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. It is the tool that you use to apply for federal financial aid. You also use it to apply for most state financial aid and most institutional financial aid, money from the colleges and universities. It is the single tool. You complete one FAFSA each year as a student, and you list all of the colleges you're applying to on that one FAFSA. And you do this every year. And every student completes this if you want access to federal student aid, whether you're an undergraduate student or a graduate student or a medical student, everyone completes the FAFSA. It is your access to federal financial aid. Typically, it would open on October 1st. That is the usual start date for the FAFSA. These last several years have been anything but typical. If you talk to last year's seniors, you know they had a tough year last year because we just implemented a new FAFSA. The federal government redesigned the FAFSA in 24-25, and it was probably easy to say it was not a success. There were lots of troubles, lots of problems through the FAFSA. So this year, the government has decided to do this in stages, and they're running smaller groups through the live version of the FAFSA to test the system, to make sure the problems don't occur this year. They will open up FAFSA for everyone on December 1st. That is the plan. But you've been invited to be part of the beta FAFSA, to have access to the FAFSA earlier than most people in the country, to actually test the system out. Now, a couple of words about why the FAFSA matters, and then we'll talk about what is a beta and what should you expect. So first of all, the FAFSA matters because seniors in high school who complete the FAFSA are much more likely to enroll immediately in college. And FAFSA is your access point to a ton of financial aid. You can see these data are a couple years old, but you can see at 21-22, there's over or nearly $177 billion given out in undergraduate financial aid. Lots of students assume, or families assume, that's only loans. I want to make sure you see the biggest piece of this pie chart is institutional grants. That's grants and scholarship money given by institutions. While loans are a part of the total financial aid package, they're not the only piece. And you want to make sure to complete all of your applications for financial aid. That may include other applications, not just the FAFSA. At University of Miami, as an example, we require an application called the CSS profile. That CSS profile is also open now for students who are interested in applying. And it's mostly private colleges that are cost like University of Miami does, but have a lot of their own institutional aid that require that CSS profile. So tonight, though, we're going to focus on the FAFSA. So why are you completing the FAFSA now? What's the incentive to do it now? Again, this is an early opportunity for you to access the application now and be among the first in the country to do so. Bridge to Life, the Broward Educational Foundation, this is the third round of beta. Our first round of beta was an in-person event on October 1st. We were the first in the country to have access to the FAFSA for students who attended that evening. And you, if you were there, you had a chance to actually complete the FAFSA live in person. Tonight, we're doing things a little differently. I'm going to walk through all of the steps you need to take and how you'll get access to the FAFSA. It is an opportunity for federal student aid to test their system out with us before they deploy it nationwide to millions of students. And you can list all of the colleges you're applying to now on the FAFSA, so you won't have to apply again later. This is your FAFSA. This is a real live FAFSA. So you will do this once for this year. This is your FAFSA. And you can list all the colleges you're thinking of applying to or might apply to for admission. And again, it's all on that one FAFSA. Because you're doing it early, it means colleges will have your information earlier, and they may be able to offer you your financial aid earlier in your cycle so that you'll be able to figure out how much you can afford and how much the colleges are able to offer you as you go through your cycle. Now, the beta is a real FAFSA. I just want to say that again. There was a question about, should you expect bugs in the beta FAFSA? No, you should not. There may be some small issues that come up, and if they are, we'll be around to help you address them, and I'll give you tonight, and I'll remind you at our later webinar, when we meet again, I'll remind you how to contact the Help Center if you do come up with issues as you go through your FAFSA. So to be part of this beta, there are 3 steps, and I'm going to highlight this a number of times tonight. There are 3 important steps, and you need to answer all 3 of them. Or do all 3 of them. Number 1, you need to create what's called your FSA ID, your Federal Student Aid Identification. And you need to complete one for your contributors as well. I'm going to go through all of that in a moment, so just bear with me, and we'll go through all of this step by step. Number 2, you need to complete the beta interest form. So I'll give you a link for that tonight. I'll give you a QR code so you can access the beta interest form. It's very important you do that second step because that is how you get access to the beta. Everyone who wants to complete a FAFSA will do step 1, but step 2 is reserved for those of you who want to do the beta. And we'll talk about that this evening. And number 3, we're going to offer a free FAFSA webinar that will be held on November 4th. I'll tell you a lot more about it as we go through tonight. And that FAFSA webinar, we will walk through every question on the FAFSA one at a time. And if you want, you can complete it. We suggest this. You can complete the FAFSA with us live on your home computer as we go through this together in a live question by question webinar on November 4th. So again, those 3 steps: number 1, your FSA ID; number 2, your beta interest form; and number 3, your FAFSA webinar. Remember, your access is for the 25-26 FAFSA. So this is for next academic year. If you're a high school senior, this is the FAFSA you will complete. If you log in today and just try to do a FAFSA, the only one you can do is the 24-25 FAFSA, unless you have access to the beta. So let's go through the FSA ID. We're going to do that first step first. And the first question is, who completes the FAFSA? So we have to answer a couple of questions. Number 1, are you a dependent student or an independent student? That's important to understand. Number 2, what is a contributor? And number 3, who's your parents? So we're going to talk through all of these questions tonight and make sure you have the best information. So the first question is, are you dependent or independent? The reason this matters is because if you're a dependent student, we have to collect your parents' information. If you're independent, we don't need information from your parents. It's just based on your finances and your information. So if you look at the questions on the screen, if you can answer yes to any of these questions, you are considered independent. If you're over 24, if you're working on a graduate degree, if you're married, if you have kids who receive more than half of their support from you, if you have other dependents who receive more than half of their support, if you're an orphan or a ward of the court or in foster care, if you're in legal guardianship or homeless or at risk of homeless, if you're either on active duty or a veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces. If you can answer yes to any of those questions, you're considered an independent student. Otherwise, you're considered a dependent student, and we will need to have your parents' information. If you have special circumstances, so let's say you don't live with your parents, you live with your grandmother, and you haven't had contact with your parents, don't worry, we have you covered as well. There is a part of the FAFSA that will allow you to say, I have special circumstances. So, but for most students, you'll either be dependent or independent based on the answers to those questions. So the first thing you need to know is, are you dependent or independent? The reason that's important is because if you're dependent, then your contributors are going to include your parents. So what is a contributor? When we talk about contributors for the FAFSA, what we mean by that is the people who are going to contribute information to the FAFSA. Not necessarily money to your college education, maybe, but really most importantly, information to the FAFSA. FAFSA defines a contributor as someone who's going to have to complete information on the FAFSA. Students, you're always a contributor, so you're going to have to complete and get an FSA ID as a contributor. If you're a married student, then your spouse might be a contributor. And if you're not married and you're a dependent student, then probably your parents or one or two of them are going to be a contributor. And I'll talk about why 1 versus 2. Every contributor has to have their own login to federal student aid. It's called an FSA ID. And that FSA ID is a combination of a username and a password. But before we get there, we need to understand, what does it mean when we say a parent. Again, you may think you know what a parent is. The FAFSA has particular rules around parents, and there's this link, which I've given you here, which is actually a really convenient, and I'll share it on the screen, a really convenient little tool where you can type in the names of your parents, your birth parents, or your adoptive parents. And let's say your parents are Rebecca and Daniel. And you can click continue, and it will ask you a series of questions. And based on the answers to those questions, it will tell you which parent or parents should fill out the FAFSA. So I've done this already. So here's Daniel and Rebecca. Are Daniel and Rebecca married to each other? Yes, we are. So that means that we are both parents on this FAFSA form. What's important to note, if you see it here, if the parents file taxes jointly, then only one parent is required as a contributor. And the year that we're looking at for tax purposes is the calendar year of 2023. So if Rebecca and I filed our tax return together in 2023, then only one of us needs to be a contributor. So if my child's name is Stefan, and Stefan is filling out the FAFSA, and we're Stefan's parents, and we file jointly, then Stefan only needs to have one of us complete the FAFSA with him because we're married to each other and we file jointly. If we don't file jointly, or let's say one of us files a return and the other one doesn't, then we both need to be contributors on the FAFSA. Even though we're married, we'll need to have two separate logins to the FAFSA. And you can see we'll need our own FSA ID to fill out our portion of the FAFSA. What if your parents aren't married to each other? So let's say we answer that first question, no, we're not married to each other. Then the FAFSA wants to know, do we live together? So what if they're not married, but living together? We never got married, we're just living together, and we have a child together. In that situation, we're both going to be contributors because likely we didn't file our taxes together. So we'll both need to have information and access to the FAFSA, which means we both need to be contributors. This is all important because your contributor needs to have an FSA ID set up. Let's go to the third scenario. What happens if we're not married and we're not living together? The next question asks, which parent provides more financial support for the student over the past 12 months? And you'll see in these two versions of this, I've said Rebecca. Rebecca's the one who provided more money to support Stefan than I did over the last 12 months. The next question asks, did Rebecca remarry? If the answer is no, then it's just Rebecca who's going to be a contributor. So if your parents are divorced and not remarried, and one parent provides more support than the other, then it's going to be that parent who's a contributor on the student's FAFSA form. If that parent is remarried, then both Rebecca, in this case, and Rebecca's spouse would be required to provide information on the FAFSA. And again, if they file taxes jointly, then only one of them needs to do it, but otherwise, both of them would need to do it. So hopefully this helps you determine. If you don't remember this, you need a reminder. Again, I would suggest going back to the FAFSA website. And what I'm going to do is copy this and put this link into the chat so you have access to the link if you'd like it. But that link is available for you if you want to check and make sure you understand who are your parents for the purpose of the FAFSA. Really important you understand who your contributors are because it matters, and it matters to make sure they have access to the FAFSA when it goes into beta form. Okay, so once you understand who your contributors are, how do you get an FSA ID and what is an FSA ID? So an FSA ID is a combination of a username and a password. And to get access to the FSA ID, you're going to start by going to studentaid.gov. So again, I'll paste this in the chat for you. Studentaid.gov is the link. Once here, you're going to click on the button that says Create Account. And I'm going to walk you through step by step how you create an account. Now, some of you may already have an FSA ID. If you already have an FSA ID, you don't have to create another one. You can use the one you already have. While we're here, though, I just want to point out that if you prefer Espanol, si puede tocar la idioma aquí, Español, and the page switches to Spanish. If you prefer English, you can choose that as well. And I will remind you that Google Translate has the ability to translate the page into almost any language. So depending upon your preferred language, if that's English or Spanish or otherwise, you can get access to the information here by clicking back and forth between those links. Okay. So what is how do you create your FSA ID? A reminder, if you're a parent and you've already completed a FAFSA for another child, or maybe you're a student and you did a FAFSA last year, you don't need a new FSA ID. It's only if you've never been a contributor on an FSA ID before that you will need to, in that situation, request an FSA ID. And when you request an FSA ID, each contributor, so the student, perhaps a parent if they're dependent, and perhaps a second parent if those parents don't file their taxes together, each contributor needs to have their own separate mobile phone number and or email address. You can't register with the same email address. You've got to have separate email addresses when you create your FSA ID. When you do this, you're going to click on the Get Started link, and you can see I'm going to walk you through the steps to create your FSA ID. And as I said, every individual contributor will need to have their own FSA ID in order to contribute to the FAFSA application. So once you're typing your basic name, if I go back, it's your name, your date of birth, your social security number. What if you don't have a social security number? So students, to receive financial aid, you will need a social security number, but your parents may not have one. If your parents don't have a social security number, you can click this box that says, I do not have a social security number. If you're the contributor as a parent and you're creating your own FSA ID, it's really important, though, in that situation, that it's not that you don't remember your social security number, but literally you do not have one. So you have not registered for a social security number. That's okay if you're the parent or spouse of a student who's applying for aid and you don't have an SSN. You can click that box and you can still create an FSA ID even so. Once you do that, it's going to ask you to create a username, an email address, or to type your email address, and password. Please write down someplace in your records your username and your password. That is how you will access the FAFSA. It's also how you'll access federal student aid for any other things you might need to do, like sign a master promissory note for a student loan, or next year when you want to do a FAFSA, or if you want to make a correction. You want to make sure you keep record of your username and your password. And again, each one of you is going to need a separate username and a separate password. So the student will have one, probably a parent will have one, unless you're an independent student, and probably a second parent will have one if you need a second parent to complete the application because parents didn't file jointly. Once you click continue, it's going to ask you for contact information, mailing address, mobile information. If you're a parent without U.S. citizenship, it's very important that you write down exactly the address you've entered here, because when your student invites you to the FAFSA later, they will need to match your address exactly. And what do I mean by exactly? So Main Street, the word street, needs to be typed exactly as Main Street on the FAFSA. If it's typed in one place as street and the other place as ST period, it will not match. If you are at 72nd Road and you put 72ND space RD period, you need to make sure that your student, when they type in your address, puts in 72ND space RD period. It needs to match absolutely exactly. This is only important if you didn't have an SSN, if you're a parent without an SSN. For those with an SSN, we'll match on your SSN. But if you don't have an SSN or a social security number, then we will match on your exact mailing address. So again, very important, parents, that you keep a record of exactly how you've created that mailing address so it matches when the student invites you to be part of their FAFSA later in the cycle. We strongly suggest that you set up your mobile phone because your mobile phone will allow you easier access to the record. So that is here as well. And then there's some other steps here. Again, strongly suggest you choose email rather than postal mail. It asks you for your language preference. So when you log in, it knows what language to communicate with you. You can set up some challenge questions. So if you forget your password, it will remind you based on the answers to your challenge questions. And the last two steps are to confirm that information you've provided and to set up a way to confirm when you log in using a two-step process where they'll either text you a code or send you an email or ask you to use what's called an authentication app. So remember, all of this is just to do step one, and this is the hardest step in this process, really, and it's to create your FSA ID. Just as a reminder and to recap, an FSA ID is required for the student. It is required for at least one parent for a dependent student and potentially the parent's spouse if they file separately from each other or don't file taxes. If a student is married, it might be required of a student's spouse if they don't file taxes together. But again, really important that you go through the process of creating those FSA IDs, one for you, one for a parent, or the parent has to create it on their own, etc. So that is step one. Once you've done that, we can move on to step two, but really important, you don't move on to step two until you complete step one. Now, I will tell you, once you submit your FSA ID, the federal government's going to confirm the information you provided, and they will email you back within 1 to 3 days. And you'll get an email that says, my FSA ID has been confirmed. We've confirmed your FSA ID. But you don't have to wait to start step two. Step two is to create or answer the questions on the FAFSA beta interest form. And this interest form, which I'm going to share with you tonight, is a special interest form just for you, just for the roughly 1,000+ people who are watching our event tonight. This is how you access or will get access to the beta FAFSA. If you skip this step, you will not be able to access the beta FAFSA. You will have to wait until December 1. But this step, and we're going to step through this together very carefully because there are multiple steps here in this beta interest form. This is what turns on your access to the beta FAFSA. You have to have created your FSA ID first, and you have to have the FSA IDs for your contributors first before you complete this form. And please do not share this form with anyone outside of the people watching this webinar. This is not for public. This is limited only to those of you who are attending tonight or watching our recording. Now, this is also important. You must submit this form by the end of the day on Monday, October 28th, this coming Monday. If you try after 11:59 p.m. on Monday, then the form will not be available. There's a limited window to sign up for the beta. And once you complete the form, the government's going to confirm it, and they'll send you an email on November 1st telling you how to access it. Now, I'm going to point out to you the website we've created. Here's the very long link. Probably most of you won't remember that very long link. So we've created this URL, tinyurl.com, and I will type this again in the chat for you, but it's tinyurl.com/ beta FAFSA, B2L. So I want to say B2L is Bridge to Life. So B2L beta FAFSA. So I'm going to type this in the chat for you too. And then let's look at the form together and I'll walk you through what is in that form. Okay, hold on. And the QR code will also take you there as well. Okay, so let us click on the link and let's open up the form and let's look at the form together. So here is the beta FAFSA interest form. Again, this is how you sign up. Really important, notice how it says beta student sign up form. This is a form the student completes. So to step you through it, you're going to click next. The very first page asks for the student information. It asks for the student's first name. I'm going to put Daniel. And it asks for the email address. I'm going to put test@test.com. Really, really, really important. This email address has to match the email address on your FSA ID. If you type it wrong, if you put your school email address in one and your home email address in another, you will not pass the screening to make sure you have access to beta. So you need to make sure that this matches whatever the student's FSA ID has as its email address. So again, please make sure this is the same email address associated with your FSA ID, also known as your studentaid.gov account. Once you do that, you click Next. The next page was going to ask you for information about your contributors. So let's give it a second. Here we go. It says, are you an independent student? Yes or no? This is important because we need to know, are we asking for your spouse? Are we asking for your parents? So I'm going to say no, I am not independent. The next question asks, do you have one parent contributor or two parent contributors? Remember, we went through this. We talked about how you determine if you have one or two parent contributors. And it says here as a hint, if your parents file your taxes jointly, you'll only need to include one parent on your form as a contributor. And it has a link to that parent wizard we talked about before. So I'm going to choose one, and I'm going to click Next. So on the next page, it's going to ask me to provide information about that one contributor. It's going to ask for their name, Rebecca, and their email address. And I'm going to type Rebecca@test.com. Now, again, that has to match Rebecca's contributor information. Otherwise, her FSA ID. Otherwise, she will not be able to access the beta. So really important, again, that as you're filling this form, you confirm that it's an exact match with the email address you entered. And the reason I'm highlighting this, I know it probably sounds ridiculous the number of times I'm saying it. What we found is about 60% of students pass through this process successfully. About 40% do not. And the 40% that do not, it's primarily because they forget or don't match the actual email addresses. So it's really, really important that you match those email addresses as you go through. And as I say, this is not an option if you want access to the beta. This is required. The other thing is, if you forgot and you only included one contributor, but you really need to have two, and you finish the form, you can always go back and do the form a second time if you need to, and it will overlay the first time. But you better make sure that they're listed as a second contributor, because otherwise what's going to happen is they will not get access to the form. So again, here we are. You can see, etc., how you might want to do that. So that is the beta form. So again, as a reminder, that is step number 2. So we talked about step number 1, which is create your FSA ID. Step number 2, you complete a beta interest form. The student completes it. Parents do not. Students complete it. On the form, they list themselves and they list their parents because it is a student application. Parents, you do not have to complete this form. It is a student-related form. But notice, the student is the one who completes the form. So the student's going to be the one that the department communicates with. So on November 1st, you will get an email that will say, yes, you have been confirmed, or no, you have not been confirmed to participate in the beta. This is what the email will look like. So it will come from noreply@studentaid.gov. It will say, thank you for signing up for the beta. In this case, it will say beta 3, and it will give you some information about the beta. So you will get an email. And again, this email will go only to students. It will not go to contributors. It goes only to students. That tells them, yes, you have been confirmed. You can now complete the FAFSA, and you will have access to the FAFSA. If you get a rejection or you don't get a confirmation email, they tell you that it's wrong. In that situation, all that means is something didn't match. Don't worry. You can still try again and do the FAFSA, but you'll have to wait until after December 1 when the FAFSA opens for everyone. So again, it's not a negative. It doesn't mean you can't do the FAFSA. It just means you had a typo or something in the process. But remember that interest form has to be completed by Monday night. Okay, so we've talked about step 1, which is the FSA ID. We talked about step 2, which is making sure that you are going ahead and putting in your interest form to let the department know that you're interested. And now we're going to talk about step 3. Step 3 is our FAFSA event. So we are going to be doing a FAFSA event. Again, it's a free event. We're going to go through the entire FAFSA question by question and help you complete the FAFSA that night. We are holding that event on November 4th. It will be recorded. So if you cannot attend, we're asking that you go ahead and register anyway, so we can send you the recording link. But the link for the registration is tinyurl.com B2L, Bridge to Life, B2L, FAFSA Live. The event will take place on November 4th at 6 p.m. Eastern. We're asking that students and contributors attend together. And that night, we'll give you a link to a form that once you do your FAFSA, you can qualify for a $20 Amazon gift card. Again, one per family. If you cannot attend, please do register. A recording will be sent to you after the evening is over. And you can complete the FAFSA independently. You don't have to attend this event. This is an event to help you. You will, assuming you're approved to be part of the beta, you will have access to the FAFSA starting on November 1. So you can actually go ahead and do it live on November 1st if you want to, but we are encouraging you to register for that November 4 event because we're going to provide, as I say, question by question answers that evening. The registration is pretty simple. We're asking for your name, your email address, your city, your phone number, and asking you what school does the student attend. But that will get you access to the information. And here is a QR code, again, to get access. So once the form goes live, and I'll share this with you again during our evening on November 4th, we're asking that you complete the form by November 7th. That is the testing period. Now, once you have access to the beta, you always have access to the form. You can complete it later if you want to, but the government's asking that you get it done by November 7th because that is the process by which they're running this test of the FAFSA. If you do have any concerns or any issues during the process, you can feel free to call the dedicated FAFSA Beta Support Center. This is a dedicated number only open to you all because you're part of this beta process. It's not available to the general public. It's only equipped to handle questions regarding beta. And you can see the open times during the week. It's closed on the weekends. If you run into any issues as you do the FAFSA, there is a link where you can report those issues, or you can call the Beta Support Center. And again, we'll go over this together on November 4th, but if you're going to try the FAFSA on your own, we thought it was important to share this page with you. And again, we will send the recording of tonight to you so you have access to this. So I just want to remind you, these are the 3 important steps. Number 1, register for your FSA ID. Make sure you also have your FSA ID registered for your contributors, either 1 or 2, depending upon your parents' tax filing status. Make sure to fill out students. Make sure to fill out that interest form at tinyurl.com/B2L Beta FAFSA by 11:59 p.m. on Monday. Again, keep in mind it has to be done by this Monday by 11:59 p.m. if you want access to the beta. And again, this is a student completed form, not a parent completed form. It's the student who does this form. You need to do it once per student. So if you have a sibling who's also going to college and they want access to the beta, you would do this one time for each sibling. On that form, you're listing all of your contributors. That's number 2. Step number 3, please register for our free FAFSA completion event on Monday, November 4th. You can register by visiting this URL or taking a snapshot of the screen, it's tinyurl.com/beta-l FAFSA live. And we will see you Monday, November 4th at 6 p.m. Reminder, if you cannot attend that night for whatever reason, register, and we will send you the recording. We know it's the night before the election. So what else are you going to do the night before the election except log in and complete your FAFSA? So really important that you get it done. We want to thank you for being part of the beta process. And I'm going to now turn to our Q&A and see if there are questions that I can answer that are coming out of the Q&A. So again, we'll keep the recording going, but I want to say if you need to depart, you can feel free to do so. I'm going to answer the questions that have been raised in the Q&A, but please be aware we will get you a copy of the recording tomorrow, along with a link to those or emails to those links, so you know exactly how to get them. Please, again, go through and do those 3 steps. So let me go through the questions that are out there. I see, again, a reminder, if you want your question answered, please do put it in the Q&A, not the chat. So I'm going to answer these questions as I go. First of all, do we get a link for creating the FSA ID? Reminder, the link for that is studentaid.gov. And on the studentaid.gov page, it says create account. That is how you create your FSA ID account. Each one of you needs to do that separately. So each one of you has the separate FSA ID. The interest form is just your name and email address and your parents' name and email address, just checking. Yes, that is correct. So again, the interest form just asks for actually first name and email address. What they're matching on is those email addresses. So it's really important that those email addresses be correct when you fill that out. There's a question, am I allowed to use a parent who doesn't claim me on my taxes as my contributor? Yes. So whether or not you're claimed on your taxes doesn't matter. For federal aid purposes, if you are under 24 and you don't qualify for any of those exceptions because you're independent, you are then considered dependent, and you need to have your parents' information even if they don't claim you on their tax return. There's a question, if my parents filed jointly, do I list the information of the parent with the highest income? If your parent files jointly, when they complete their section of the FAFSA, both incomes for both parents are going to come in together. It's just that only one of them needs to access the tax record. The reason only one needs to be a contributor is because the IRS is matching to pull the tax record over. And for joint filers, once one person authorizes that record to be pulled, all of their information gets pulled. So Haley, it's your question. Let's say mom and dad file jointly together, and you choose to file the form with mom. Dad's information will already be pulled over when mom completes her section. The reason that if mom and dad filed separately, that they each have to be a contributor is because they have separate tax records. And so we need to pull each information separately from the IRS. Okay, let's see. How do I edit a form that I already submitted on the FAFSA website? I presume you're talking about a FAFSA that's been completed. If it's remember, unless you've had access to a previous beta, any FAFSA you did from this point earlier is going to be a 24-25 FAFSA. But assuming you had access to the beta and you've done the beta FAFSA, you can then log in and make what's called a correction. So once you have completed a FAFSA, you'll be able to log in throughout the year and make a correction. Why might you make a correction? Well, maybe you forgot to include one of the colleges you were applying to on your initial FAFSA, and you have to log in and now make sure to add them, right? So in that situation, you want to have access to a FAFSA correction, and that is the process for changing information. There's a question about what was that thing I said about matching emails addresses. So let me go through that again, just to make sure that that is clear. The email address from the interest form has to match the FSA ID. So when you create your FSA ID, you want to make sure when you do the interest form that those email addresses match. That is true for everyone, regardless of student or parent. citizen or non-citizen, those email addresses have to match. If they don't match, then you can't get access to the beta. There's a special note about addresses for parents who don't have an SSN. If you're a parent and you do not have a social security number, you can still create an FSA ID, but when you do, please make sure to note exactly the address that you typed in, whether that has abbreviations and periods, spaces or no spaces, because later on, when your student invites you to be part of the FAFSA, you'll need to make sure that that exactly matches the address that you put in your FSA ID. So that's only for parents who don't have a social security number. That's really important. Okay. I am one of the parents. I pay child support, but she's in custody and we basically share time. Is there a calculation or a general rule of thumb? So let me answer that question. So the parent wizard asks, which parent pays more of the child's support? They leave that up to you, the student, to determine. And there's no hard and fast rule of thumb, except to say you should look over the last 12 months and see who provided more money to support the student. Sometimes that money is in the form of child support. Sometimes that money is just money paid for rent or for food or for mortgage. It really is up to you as a family unit to determine, in the case of divorce or separation, which family is the family who made or who paid more than half of that child's support. If the answer is exactly even, right, or the answer is that neither of you paid anything to support the child, only then does the FAFSA ask you to use the parent with the highest income. Again, nothing on here asks about claiming the child for tax purposes. Nothing on here says anything about, who the child lives with. It's based exclusively on who pays more to help support the child. So that is up to you as a family to determine and provide the answer for. For step number 3, Daniel asks, do we write the student or parent's name and email? So this is for registration for the FAFSA event on November 4th. My advice to you there is you choose, it doesn't really matter for that registration. Just make sure it's someone who's going to check their email, because we will email a reminder for the webinar that night and your login code to that person's address. If it's easier for consistency to make sure that's the student, that's great. I know students aren't necessarily terrific at checking their email, though. So that is really up to you as to how you would like to do that. Let's see. I have a message that says, it says the federal student aid website is unavailable and you guys are working on it. Let's check that out. I know that studentaid.gov has had some issues in the last several days. I thought it was up and running. When I just logged in, it is. So let me share with you what I'm looking at. So if I come over here, here is, hold on, let me share my screen. Here is studentaid.gov. To get here, I just simply typed studentaid.gov. That is the first place I'm going to go. I'm going to click create account. I'm going to click get started. And here are the links that I was talking about before to create your FSA ID. That is step 1. It looks to me like it is up and running. Remember, let's leave here for a second. Remember, step 2 was tinyurl.com/B2L, all lowercase, B2L beta FAFSA. That brings you to the beta student sign-up form. Again, beta student sign-up form. That is live. So again, I'm not seeing any problems in connecting. And the last one is tinyurl.com/B2L live FAFSA, or sorry, FAFSA live, B2L FAFSA live. And that is the Zoom registration. So again, from what I could see, all of the links are working. So hopefully that addresses the question that was asked about access. So again, I apologize if you're having issues, but it seems to me that it's working for me live now. My parents have recently separated. They haven't filed taxes, not recently, not jointly. Since it's recent, Should I file separate? I don't want them to think I'm lying. Okay, great question. So let's go look at the FAFSA parent wizard. Now, again, I want to point you through this. So if your parents are separated, and let me share my screen and let's look at that parent wizard together. So again, I hope, yep, you are seeing my screen. So I'm just going to type FAFSA parent wizard. Who counts as a parent on the FAFSA form? I'm going to type the names of my parents are Daniel and Rebecca. So if your parents are separated, they are, in other words, because this question asks, are they married to each other, not separated? If they are separated, you are fine to answer no, right? So if they're separated, the answer to that first question would be no. The next question is important, though. Do they live together? So if they are separated but still live together, then they both have to file the form. If they're separated and live separately, then it goes to the question of who provided more financial support. So without knowing more about your situation, to the person who answered that or asked that question, you need to go through this process to determine. But the first question would be they are separated. So the answer to that would be legitimately no, they are not married. Okay. So there's a question if you did the wrong year, let's say you did the wrong year 24-25, you can log in and delete the form. There's no harm in having completed the wrong year. I know some people who jumped the gun may have gone in and done the 24-25 FAFSA in error. There's no problem with that. Again, if it's the wrong year, it will not be an issue. It doesn't cause any harm in the system. Okay, I have a question. How do we know you have her email address? So again, we're not the federal government. We're not monitoring email addresses. So you need to make sure that you look at what is in the federal student aid system, what you registered for the FSA ID. That is the important piece and the most important piece in terms of making sure that it matches that FSA ID. So do you have to complete the beta by this coming Monday or November 7th? It is this coming Monday by 11:59 p.m. to get access to the beta. If not, you've missed your window of opportunity, and the FAFSA will open for everyone nationally on December 1. Catherine asks, when I fill out the FAFSA for 25-26, when will I receive the confirmation? You'll get that confirmation the exact same day you do the FAFSA, and your school will already get your information the next day or the next several days. So again, no need to be worried about that. It is a real FAFSA. It's really going off to students. It's really going off to schools. Who registers for the November 4 webinar? Is that the student or parent? That is your choice. Again, if it's easier for you to track, if the student registers, that's fine. If you want the parent to, that's fine. Just make sure someone has registered for that event. What is the difference between FAFSA and CSS? So let me again address that, and I'm going to do that by sharing my screen. So the FAFSA, and I talked about the CSS profile a little earlier tonight. The FAFSA is required of everyone who wants to qualify for federal financial aid. The CSS profile is a form that's only required of this list of schools. And what I'm going to do is copy this, and I will paste this link into the chat. This is a second application that a number of private institutions do require for their eligibility for institutional financial aid. I have pasted that into the chat for you. And if you pull down, for example, the state, you'll see in Florida, for domestic students, University of Miami is the only school that requires the CSS profile for domestic students. For international students, both Stetson and Ringling College of Art and Design also ask for the CSS profile. But if you might be applying to a school in Massachusetts, for example, there are a lot of schools in Massachusetts that require the CSS profile. So you want to make sure if you're applying to a private not-for-profit college and you want to determine whether or not they require the CSS profile, you can look through this list. You only do this application once, and only if it's listed as required for domestic students unless you're international, at which point you would use the other link for international students. So hopefully that answers the question about the CSS profile. Let's see. Must the student use the same username and password that he used or she used for the common application? No. You can use a different application or different username and password from the Common App to the FSA website. In fact, I would recommend it just because they're different systems with different information. Okay. So if we fill out the parent email for the survey and they recently made an account and still waiting on that email that takes 1 to 3 days for verifying, can we still submit the survey? Yes, please do. So again, let me try to answer that for you clearly. So remember, when you register for an FSA ID, it can take 1 to 3 days for them to confirm your FSA ID, but do not wait. Once you fill out the FSA ID, go ahead and complete the interest form. We don't want you to miss Monday's deadline. By the time behind the scenes confirms your information, that will be November 1st, and you will get confirmed with your invitation to do the beta FAFSA. So tonight, go ahead and make sure your FSA IDs are created. Go ahead and register tonight if you can for the interest form. Make sure that those email addresses match what you put on your FSA ID, and also make sure to register for our webinar. And again, once you register for that webinar, that will cover you for the FAFSA live event that we will have on November 4th. In the evening of November 4th, we will go question by question through the FAFSA. We'll invite you to have your FAFSA open on another screen, and we'll invite you to go with us through the form. We will have a number of people behind the scenes to answer your questions as we go through that form that evening to make sure that we get your questions answered. Again, a reminder, you can, if you're not sure, if you think you might have made an error on the interest form, you can go back and do it a second time, or a third time, or a fourth time, or a fifth time, however many times you need to do the interest form to make sure you got it right. There is no limit. Please don't do it just for fun, but it is available for you if you make a mistake or you think you might have made a mistake. You can always go back. I have a grandparent who's asking, I have temporary custody of my grandchild. Is this grandchild considered independent? That is a great question, and I'm going to go back to the comment about dependent versus independent. So first of all, a grandparent, unless you have legally adopted the child, you are never going to complete the FAFSA form as a parent. What will likely happen is the student will either be independent if they qualify for one of the independent rules, and I'm going to look up dependency status and FAFSA right now, and I'll show you that. Or if they don't qualify and they don't meet any of these criteria, then there'll be a question that asks later, is there another reason why your parents can't complete this information? Either because there's no contact with your parents or your parents refuse to provide information. If those situations are the case, specifically if you have no contact with your parents because you've left home due to an abusive situation or neglect, then in that situation, you can fill out the FAFSA with something called a provisionally independent status. That is reserved for students who are in an unusual circumstance like that. And again, I've listed the link in the chat. So if you have questions about this, you can see exactly how this process works. But it sounds like as a grandparent, you might have a student who's not in contact with their parents. Please read this question here and let me know if you have questions. Okay, let's go on. Can we send a link to the beta interest form? So I'll say it again. The beta interest form is at tinyurl.com, and I'm going to type it in here, but I'll also send it to you. It's tinyurl.com/B2L for Bridge to Life. B2L, Beta FAFSA. Beta FAFSA. So that is the link for the interest form. We tried to make it as easy as possible for you to remember. The other link, if you're looking for the link to register for the live FAFSA event, it is again B2L FAFSA Live. So that is the best way to reach that event. So we've reached the hour mark. I want to say thank you to all of you. I recognize that we did not get through all of your questions, and I apologize that we weren't able to answer every question. So what I will say is, again, please do complete the interest form. Remember that once you do that interest form, it's going to take you some time before you get the confirmation. That confirmation will come November 1st. We will, again, send you a copy of this recording. We will also send you links to the links that I've shared this evening. I want to thank all of you for joining us. I want to thank my volunteers behind the scenes who have been here with us all along, answering your questions. We did, as I said before, have over 1,000 people joining us this evening. And so I want to thank all of you for your focus on making sure your students are able to get access to the FAFSA. And I'm going to play us out with a song that I think probably is near and dear to most of our hearts right now, which is If I Had $1 Million. So for those of you that remember that song, it's been a couple of years, we'll play you out to that. Thank you for joining us tonight. I look forward to seeing you on November 4th. Thank you for being with us this evening.
If I had $1 million,
If I had $1 million,
well, I'd buy you a house.
I would buy you a house.
And if I had $1 million,
If I had $1 million,
buy you furniture for your house.
maybe a nice Chesterfield or an ottoman.
And if I had $1 million,
If I had $1 million,
well, I'd buy you a cake car.
a nice reliant automobile.
And if I had $1 million, I'd buy your love. If I had $1 million,
I'd build a tree fort in our yard.
if I had $1 million,
You could help, it wouldn't be that hard.
if I had $1 million,
Maybe we could put like a little tiny fridge in there somewhere.
we could just go up there and hang out.
Like open the fridge and stuff, and there'll always be foods laid out for us with little pre-wrapped sausages and things. They have pre-wrapped sausages, but they don't have pre-wrapped bacon.
Well, can you blame them?
Yeah.
If I had $1 million,
If I had $1 million,
well, I'd buy you a fur coat.
but not a real fur coat, that's cruel.
And if I had $1 million,
If I had $1 million,
well, I'd buy you an exotic pet.
yep, like a llama or an emu.
And if I had $1 million,
If I had $1 million,
well, I'd buy you John Merrick's remains.
ooh, all them crazy elephant bones.
And if I had $1 million, I'd buy your love. If I had $1 million,
We wouldn't have to walk to the store.
if I had $1 million,
Now we'd take a limousine 'cause it costs
if
more.
I had $1 million,
We wouldn't have to eat Kraft dinner.
but we would eat Kraft dinner.
Of course we would. We just eat more.
and buy really expensive ketchups with it.
That's right, all the fanciest Dijon ketchup.
If I had $1 million,
If I had $1 million,
well, I'd buy you a green dress.
but not a real green dress, that's cruel.
And if I had $1 million,
If I had $1 million,
well, I'd buy you some art.
a Picasso or a